Some people know me as someone who writes a lot, and some people know me as someone who makes music sometimes. Some know me personally, some know me as all of the above. But there's a part of me that most people don't know, a set of experiences that shaped almost everything about who I am. I spent a lot of time wondering if I was the problem, or if the real problem is the way that the world responds to pain. And that so problematic pain is what landed me in treatment as an adolescent more than once. In those places, I met people who changed me and people who are also being changed. People like me. People also know me for another reason, not personally, not because they met me, but because of whom my parents are. My parents are David Bowie and Iman. I don't lead with that in my everyday life. My last name is Jones, and I grew up mostly being treated like a normal kid in normal environments. And for a long time, I tried to keep it that way. But whether I talked about it or not, it still shaped my life. I say it very plainly because avoiding it doesn't make it less real. People assume that means having a perfect childhood and a protected one and a magical one. And parts of it were. I was loved, I was cared for, I had opportunities most people never get, and I'm genuinely grateful for that, and I always will be. But what people don't understand is that life, being extraordinary, doesn't make it emotionally simple. I grew up being watched before I understood what being watched meant. And adults would talk to me differently than they would talk to other kids. Some were kind, some were fascinated, some were not interested in me as a person at all, and only as a proximity to something else. So very early on, I started to feel like I existed as an idea, not Lexi the person, Lexi the daughter. People projected onto me constantly. Expectations I didn't understand. Comparisons I could never live up to. I didn't just feel like I had to figure out who I was. I felt like I already was defined before I even got the chance. I learned young that attention and care are not always the same thing. Some people wanted access. Some people wanted closeness to what I represented. Some people wanted stories. Some people wanted something from me I couldn't even name. And as a kid, you don't know how to separate genuine connection from interest. You just know something feels off, but you just don't have the language to know why. It made me very confused by people. I struggled to understand what a real relationship was supposed to feel like. I couldn't tell if someone liked me for me or what being around me meant for them. That does something to your state of safety, and you start questioning every single interaction, every kindness, and every friendship. But at the same time, I felt guilty for struggling at all. Because how could I be unhappy? How could I feel empty when my life was so full from the outside? So I internalized that. I thought my pain meant something was wrong with me, specifically. That I was broken in a way that I shouldn't be allowed to be broken in. And that I didn't deserve to feel that way. I didn't want fame. I didn't want attention. I didn't want to be a public person, and I still don't. The spotlight never felt like warmth to me. It felt like exposure, like being visible without being known. I became scared of people and depended on them at the same time. I wanted connection desperately, but I didn't trust it when I had it. And I was emotionally exhausted very young, and I didn't understand why. So when my mental health started collapsing, it didn't come out of nowhere. It came from years of confusion with identity and expectation and feeling watched but not understood. I didn't have the tools to explain all of it because I didn't understand myself. And that was a state I was in before everything happened, before anyone realized something was actually wrong, and before I understood myself completely. I've always been open about what I feel and what I think, and I'd like to believe I'm an introspective person. That probably comes from going to treatment so many times. We were encouraged and sometimes pressured to share our deepest turmoils and triggers and traumas in the name of growth. We were taught to speak a language I had never heard of before, words and emotions and coping mechanisms and identity. We had to decode everything that we thought we knew about ourselves before, who we were, unedited, and were seen as broken. And I was 14. At that age, I should have been taking school exams, going to high school parties, and maybe having my first kiss. But instead, whatever little freedom I had was taken even further away from me. I wanted to grow up, but not like that. Treatment made me realize how much I had to fast forward my teenage years. I found myself longing to be a teenager, even though I was one. just not in the conventional sense. And I'm telling this story now because so many people still don't know what it's really like in those places. They don't know what it takes from you. They don't know what it teaches you or what it breaks. I want to say something out loud that a lot of us were made to keep quiet and not to speak for everybody, but to make it easier for someone else to speak too. I was a happy kid. I think I was. But something hit me pretty young, before I was around 10. I started seeing a therapist because my teachers noticed something was off, and so did my parents. That was around the time I had my first anxiety attack. I internalized something I didn't even understand yet, and something that had nothing to do with me, and it stayed with me. So a few years later, things got heavier. I started to feel depressed, like my mind was turning against me. I was failing school. I had learning disabilities that made everything feel harder, and I hated the way I looked. And I developed bulimia when I was 12. I started self-harming when I was 11. I didn't know why I felt the way I felt. I just knew I was miserable. I felt stupid, incompetent, like unworthy, useless, unlovable. And having successful parents kind of only made it worse. It felt like I would never live up to them. I couldn't understand how I came from people that were thriving in every single direction while I was failing at everything. I hated myself inside and out, and I let those comparisons drag me down even more. When my dad was diagnosed with cancer, I was at my breaking point. I was barely 14. I could already see what the future would look like for my family and for all of us. I felt broken before it even happened, and I didn't want to stick around to watch it fall apart. That's when I turned to drugs and alcohol. It was my first year of high school, and everyone around me was experimenting. But for me, it wasn't about fun. I wasn't experimenting. I was escaping from my complicated mind, my complicated family, my complicated school. When the party ended, for everybody else, I kept going, and I drank and got high alone. I was angry, I was scared, I was numb, but I felt free. Free from being agreeable, free from being the well-behaved version of myself. I broke out in defiance. I did everything I wasn't supposed to do and more. Because I was angry. I was scared, I was numb. But I was free until I wasn't. My mental health kept declining and my substance use got worse. And I became someone who lashed out. I was cruel to people who didn't treat me the way I wanted to be treated. Part of me felt like I was trying to make up for all the times that I felt like a doormat. Like I was begging to be respected by becoming something people feared, or at least noticed. I couldn't keep pasting a smile on my face while I was breaking, but my breaking didn't just affect me. That's something I didn't realize back then. This was a build-up to where it all led, which was my first form of treatment, and that was wilderness therapy. It didn't happen in the middle of the night. It was a weekday morning. I already had gotten ready for school. My mom called me out to the living room. My dad, my godmother, and my mom were all standing there. It felt like an intervention, and in some ways it was. My dad read a letter he had written. I don't really remember what it said, but I do remember the last line, and it said, "I'm sorry we have to do this." Then two men came through the door, and they were both well over 6 feet tall. They told me I could do this the easy way or the hard way. I chose the hard way. I resisted, I screamed, I held onto the table leg. They grabbed me, they put their hands on me, they pulled me away from everything I knew, and I was screaming bloody murder. I was screaming for someone to help me, but no one did. My parents and my godmother just watched. They were crying, but they let it happen. The men looped a rope around me, around my body, not to hurt me, though, just to control me. It hurt anyway, and I felt like cattle. I felt stripped of any right to stay in my own life. They got me back into a black SUV and shoved me inside. But by the time the door shut, my parents were already gone. I was alone. I was in a car with two strange men that wouldn't tell me where we were going, and I just sat there, like, completely horrified and silent. As we got closer to wherever they were taking me, I started to realize how far I was from home. It felt like the middle of nowhere. And it was winter. There were piles of snow everywhere. I didn't know exactly where we were, but I knew I was not going to be home for a very long time. We pulled into a parking lot, and there was a small building. That was a front office. And it was the beginning of whatever my life was about to become. They strip searched me. They made sure I wasn't hiding anything in or on my body. They did kindly hold a sheet up in front of me while I was undressing so I wouldn't be exposed all the way. And they handed me clothes, which was a blue fleece crew neck snow pants, a kind of greenish jacket and hiking boots, and a giant ass backpack that was bigger than me at the time. I have never heard of anything like this before. I didn't know wilderness therapy existed. I was a city girl. I was born and raised in the city. I had been camping before, but nothing like this. This was not camping. It felt like boot camp's weird cousin, and it was disguised as something therapeutic. I was there for 91 days, 3 months. We could only communicate with people from the outside world through letters, and only once a week. And even then, only approved people were allowed to write to us or hear from us. We made fires by stripping birch bark and striking flint and steel, and if we got more advanced, we would learn how to bow drill. We cooked our meals over those fires and learned how to tie knots to set up tarps, and we would sleep under those tarps on a yoga mat and a sleeping bag. We dug holes in the ground to use as bathrooms, far away from the site, and every time we used the bathroom, we had to count out loud so that staff would keep track of us. And this kind of thing kind of becomes normal after a while, even though it shouldn't. When you first arrive, you're not allowed to talk to anybody in the group, and not the other kids, not to yourself out loud. You're considered a potential safety risk until they can evaluate your behavior and decide if you're fit to be incorporated in the group. So until then, you're invisible in a way that's really hard to describe. Like you're being watched but not acknowledged. There was a lot of therapy. Some of it was helpful. Some of it felt like being cracked open and left exposed. I had a great group of girls that were with me. It felt like a real community. We made each other laugh. We made each other feel human, even in a place that was stripping that away from us. But still, the entire experience felt dehumanizing. Like the whole point was to take away every basic human comfort and need. No TV, no bed, no roof, no privacy. So that we'd behave right in hopes of earning back small privileges. We showered once a week. We didn't have mirrors. We weren't allowed to know the time of day. I once made tweezers out of a twig because I wanted to groom myself and I wanted to feel feminine and clean. I wanted to feel like a girl again because that's part of being human. Natural instinct to care for yourself, to feel good in your own skin. I may have learned things about confidence and resilience, but I didn't choose to be there. And if you don't choose change, it's hard to know what change even means. I didn't know who I was yet. I was too young to know who I was supposed to be. We told riddles and sang songs and shared everything we knew from our home states. We were all so different, but we were the same in the way that mattered most. We've been judged. We've been treated like we were bad when really we were just scared, acting from pain and from confusion, from really the ache of just not being understood. And maybe, yeah, some of us needed help. Maybe we needed some kind of support. But even now it feels wrong to say that places like that aren't the answer, especially for kids, and especially for kids like us. I go back and forth with myself about it all the time, and I feel guilty for thinking badly of it. I try to justify it because I wasn't physically abused, at least not after the whole gooning, escorting situation. I know how lucky I am because that's not the case for a lot of kids. But still, the mental and emotional manipulation I experienced is something I will not forget. And I won't pretend it didn't happen because that is abuse too. I thought I was going home after wilderness, but instead I was immediately sent to Utah to a residential treatment center, which is a therapeutic boarding school. And I was there for 13 months. When I got there, I felt like everything I'd worked for in wilderness disappeared. I had reached the highest level in wilderness and I had all the privileges that you could possibly earn there. But the second I stepped into the RTC in Utah, it was like starting over completely. It kind of felt like it was worse than starting over because I wasn't even placed on phase 1. I was placed on something called safety, which means that you have to be within 5 feet of a staff member at all times. I was strip searched again. I had to be watched while I slept. I had to count every time I used the bathroom. There were only 5 phases that were spread out across 13 months. And I did well. I complied. I tried. But I messed up sometimes because I was 15. And 15-year-olds mess up. One of those times was when I kissed a girl in my house. And the staff found out and they did not take that lightly. I was dropped back down from phase 3 to safety again. 5 feet from staff at all times, again. Counting in the bathroom, again. Being watched while I slept, again. And on top of that, I was put on something called communication block with the entire house, which is when you're not allowed to speak to anyone for a period of time. For me, it was for a couple of weeks, maybe a month. It felt like solitary confinement, and I felt like a prisoner, kind of, in my own body. And still, it wasn't all bad. Utah was actually beautiful. I met one of my best friends there, and we're close. We had adventures. We poured ourselves into art, and we had the best teacher I've ever had, our art teacher. We laughed, we cried, obviously. The therapy was intense, and it hurt. It was exposing. I was not ready, but I had to be ready. All of this was happening while my dad was only getting more sick back at home. And for the first time in a long time, I actually wanted to be there with him, with my family. The same family I used to want nothing to do with. A few months into the program, my dad passed away. I was not there. I had the luxury of speaking to him 2 days before, on his birthday. I told him I loved him and he said it back, and we both knew. Then I saw the post, the one that said something like David Bowie passed away, surrounded by his whole family. It made me physically ill because, yeah, the whole family was there, except for me. I've accepted it. I've tried not to internalize it or feel guilty, but sometimes I still have those moments where I wish things were to be different. Processing his death became a whole new layer of the program. They created a special phase for me called the grief and loss phase. They structured my grief. They categorized it and assigned milestones and expectations. At the time, I thought that was normal. I had never lost anyone that close to me, and I didn't know how to grieve, and that was my only frame of reference. So more time passed on, and there were highs and there were lows. And eventually I left. I left about a month or two before I turned 16. I finally got to go home for good, with set rules and stuff, of course. Rules I thought I was slick enough to bend without anyone noticing. I don't remember a lot from when I first got back home, but I just know I slipped back into old patterns. Maybe it was the shock of going from one world to another. I'd spent a year living under constant structure, inside a place that was nothing like real life. And then suddenly I was back home, back in the world, and it felt like sensory overload. There was too much freedom, too much noise, and too many choices all at once. Maybe I learned coping skills, yes, but I was not ready to absorb them. I think I was too young, and I think I didn't know who I was or what I needed. Whatever the reason, I let it take me even further away from myself, or maybe I took myself there. Either way, I had just enough freedom to start wrecking things again. The rules I had at home were nothing compared to the ones in treatment, nothing close to the humiliation that came with being punished in those places. So I tested everything. I tried to live life fast to cram the years I've lost into the time I had left, and I spiraled. And it wasn't long before I got gooned, escorted, legal kidnapped again. I got sent away again to the next place. This repetitive cycle of being sent away had made everything start to blend together. The ache of being away from my life, my people, myself, made me feel like a problem that was being passed off. Every place had its own rules, and it felt like I was always being reshaped to fit somewhere I didn't ask to be. I stopped asking where I was going. I stopped expecting it to make sense, and I just went. But I'm not here to give a rundown of each place I've been sent away to. That's not the point. The point is to show what this system does to a person, what it takes to be sent away over and over again, told you're too much, too broken, too difficult to handle. The point is to talk about what no one talks about, the parts of yourself you lose in the process of being fixed. The point is to make this real so that it's not just a memory I carry in private or something other people dismiss as a phase I grew out of. The point is that this happened to me and to a lot of other kids that deserve better. As much as I went through things that no kid should have to go through, I also became someone I'm proud of. Someone that's emotionally intelligent, introspective, not afraid to reflect on some of the harder things. And most of that came from what I lived through inside those places. I was forced to look inward before I even had a chance to look outward. I had to understand emotions before I understood algebra. I had to become fluent in the language of healing before I even knew who I was. And yeah, maybe that wasn't fair. Maybe it wasn't gentle, but it's a part of who I am now. So, no, this is not just a story about trauma. It's a story about how I was shaped, not just by what hurt me, but by what I built in response to it. And now, years later, I'm still figuring those things out. I still question a lot. I still carry some of it in ways I don't understand, but I also carry strength and awareness and creativity. I don't think I'd be this emotionally tuned if I hadn't been forced to look so closely at myself so early. I wish it had happened under better circumstances, but I can't pretend it didn't shape me into someone who sees people deeply, who feels things deeply, who creates from that place. I still flinch sometimes when things feel too controlled, and I still get the urge to scan the room for rules I haven't been told yet. I still feel guilty for wanting freedom, but I also feel proud of how far I've come. Not because I was fixed, because I finally get to define healing for myself.